Welcome. In this video on the Second World War, we will look at 1940 going into 1941. We left off after having seen Nazi Germany defeat Poland, Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, and even France in a matter of weeks. And so less than a year after declaring war, only Britain stands against Nazi Germany. The United States is decidedly neutral and wants no interest in another world war. Hitler even has a non-aggression pact, a treaty with the Soviet Union. So how is it that Hitler and the Nazis will fall? We give a lot of credit to the British and particularly to Prime Minister Winston Churchill. Hitler will begin preparing an attack on Britain by trying to secure air dominance. And so this will look like the German Luftwaffe targeting the RAF, the Royal Air Force, that's the British Air Force, targeting the RAF airfields, radar towers, and attempting to destroy planes on the ground, destroy repair facilities, trying to engage in fighter against fighter, airplane against airplane dogfights over the skies of Britain, and trying to bomb airport support facilities, and they are gaining the upper hand. But for reasons we don't entirely know, Hitler grows impatient with this and either fears the Soviet Union attacking him from behind, or maybe simply doesn't really believe in it. For whatever reason, wants to change the tactic and switches from his successful focus on the British airfields to what they call the London Blitz, which is an unsuccessful focus on bombing the city of London. It gives the Royal Air Force time to rebuild its numbers, its fields, its radar facilities in order to better defend against the civilian bombing of the city of London. And after months and months of this, the British gain the upper hand. Prime Minister Churchill famously said that never was so much owed by so many to so few, meaning that so much that they prevented Nazi domination was owed by so many, maybe the whole world, for sure the British Empire, the island of England, to so few, the few hundred pilots of the Royal Air Force who defended the entire island of Britain, the British Empire, maybe the entire world from Nazi success at this point. All of that was owed to a few hundred pilots who were defending London from the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe. At the same time, there's battle raging on the Atlantic Ocean. German U-boats, Unterseeboats, submarines, are sinking merchant ships bound for Britain, trying to strangle its economy, trying to cut off food supplies. They're trying to blockade the British economy. Unlike World War I, Britain cannot blockade Germany as effectively as they did in World War I because Germany controls Norway, which has a long coastline, controls the entire French coastline on the Atlantic, controls some colonies in North Africa, has allied with Italy, and so unlike stopping up the Baltic Sea like they did in World War I, the British are not counter-blockading Germany, but Germany is attempting to blockade the British economy. Also, Italy not only is allied with Germany, but joins the war and had declared war on France. They waited till after Paris fell and then attacked France in the south, which only accelerated the French defeat. Italy's one of its major contributions in 1940 is to invade the British colony in Egypt from the Italian colony in Libya, and they invade, but the British counterattack and push the Italians back hundreds of miles. So the Germans send German troops under General Erwin Rommel, nicknamed the Desert Fox for his future success here in North Africa, under the Afrika Korps. The British send General Bernard Montgomery to take charge of the British forces in North Africa, and throughout 1940 and into 41 and even 42, there's a series of back and forth battles. What was the major significance in North Africa? The key would be if the Axis powers, the Italians and Germans, would seize Egypt and the Suez Canal, which would mark a severe blow against British trade and travel and supply, and then possibly to steamroll into the Middle East and capture oil reserves and oil production in the Middle East and Iraq. 1941 will see a climactic change in the war as both the Soviet Union, Russia, and the United States will join World War II. Early in 1941, Italy, seeking some of the glory that Nazi Germany has been gaining from its many conquests, launches an invasion of Greece from a base in Albania. Albania they had conquered actually 2 years prior in 1939, but it fails miserably, and the Greeks begin pushing them back, and the Italians ask for help from Germany. Germany marches to the help of Italy, but invades Yugoslavia on its way to Greece, and so spends 6 weeks taking over Yugoslavia, pushes into Greece, takes the large island of Crete entirely by paratrooper. Nazi soldiers falling out of the sky take the island of Crete. And critically, the fact that Italy created this diversion in Greece, needed help, and Germany bailed them out by attacking Yugoslavia, which they had no intent to do at that time, and by sending troops all the way to the tip of Europe and Greece before they would gear up for this long-planned invasion of Russia. They believe it delayed Hitler's invasion of Russia by maybe 2 months, which, when you see how this war goes by the end of 1941, what Hitler would have done to get those extra 6 to 8 weeks back of good weather might have meant the defeat of the Soviet Union. It's hard to tell, but therefore Mussolini's invasion of Greece, it didn't seem like such a disaster at the time, but when we look back at it, in some ways might be the reason Russia survives the initial German attack, or at least a contributing factor. So on June 22nd of 1941, the largest land invasion of all time, 3 million troops, tanks, trucks, artillery, airplane, panzers, blitzkrieg into Russia, with the aid eventually of all 3 of these German allies, Romania, Hungary, and Bulgaria, all send troops with the Germans blitzkrieging into Russia. They meet overwhelming success. Huge numbers of vast armies surrendering, loss of equipment, loss of land. Something like 80% of the Russian Air Force near the border was destroyed, much of it on the ground. They did not even have time to get into the skies to be useful. They were bombed and destroyed on the ground, many of the Russian Air Force. A lot of Russian tanks and heavy equipment were poised near the front and were captured or destroyed in the early weeks of the war. What hope does Russia have? They have their scorched earth policy, much as they used to defend against Napoleon. The Russians were quick to point to the Great Patriotic War against Napoleon, and were quick to try to forget the disaster of World War I. So they focused on scorched earth, destroy everything. The Russians would destroy their own homes and villages and supplies to prevent them from falling into the hands of the Russians. They would practice guerrilla warfare, again from the Napoleonic Wars. That's that Spanish word for little war, where you have hit-and-run tactics. And so the German army might blitz through a huge area, but behind their lines you blow up bridges, blow up trucks, take sniper shots, pot shots. This is something that an inferior force will do against a superior one. The United States, when it has vast superior resources, often falls victim to this by other armies using guerrilla-type tactics in Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, where you have an inferior force trying to simply inflict any type of loss, no matter how small, on a larger force. The Russians have hope because they have lots of men, lots of land, and they will soon have Allied help. Let's now shift gears over to the Pacific and look at the U.S. entry into the war in 1941. In 1941, the United States was firmly in the isolationist camp. It was the traditional American policy, was to stay out of Europe's affairs. President Washington warned the United States of staying out. Many Americans did not want the U.S. to get involved in World War I, and now that it was over, many Americans regretted it. And so their regret extended into what we could call a war hangover. That war was so bad, why would anyone ever do it again? Against our American better judgment, we got involved in that stupid World War I, so why would we do it again? And furthermore, the economy was terrible. The worst maybe it had ever been during the Great Depression. And so the idea of spending even more money trying to bail out Europe from its problems is how many Americans saw it. But we'd already tried that just 20 years ago, and they're already in a worse mess than they were then. Let them sort it out themselves. And so America was firmly isolationist, wanting to be isolated and kept away from the problems of Europe. However, President Franklin Roosevelt continuously pushed closer relations with Britain and with the warring Allied powers, mainly Britain. He was in constant contact with letters and telegrams with Prime Minister Churchill. He declared the United States would maybe not join, but could be the arsenal of democracy, the weapons storehouse of democracy. However, they had to follow what was called the cash and carry policy at first, that they would sell weapons only to the non-dictatorships, mainly to Britain. They would be the arsenal of democracy, but they didn't want Allied war loans to drag the United States into the war, much as it did in World War I. So the policy was cash and carry. They would not allow the British to buy war material from the United States on loan. They would have to pay cash up front, and they would have to carry it on British ships. Then Roosevelt begins a policy later into 41 of armed neutrality. In late 1940 and 41, this is when the Selective Service, this is the first ever time the United States begins a peacetime draft. If, again, you'll recall in World War I, the United States declared war in 1917. It takes about a year to go from not having an army to drafting an army large enough to make an impact on a major world war. Well, Selective Service, the draft in the United States, armed neutrality, begins in late 1940, so that by the time of the Pearl Harbor attack in December of 1941, the United States already has had a year to build up a large war-size army. Now, it's not nearly as big as it will be, but it means that the United States is almost ready to take action immediately upon war being declared, which is very different from World War I. And then finally, when Britain runs out of money, FDR resorts to the Lend-Lease program, whereby the British will lease or allow the U.S. to rent bases that the British had controlled in the Western Hemisphere, and in exchange, the United States would lend them old warships, destroyers. Roosevelt made the analogy that if your neighbor's house was on fire, wouldn't you let him borrow your garden hose to hook up to a spigot and put the fire out with water? Now, his critics said that war material is not like a fire hose. War material you often don't ever get back, or if you get it back, it comes back all damaged and used and in bad condition. And his critics said that it's not at all like lending someone a fire hose or a garden hose. It's more like lending someone a stick of chewing gum. You either don't get it back, or if you do, you wish you didn't. And so these consistent policies, this consistent march toward more and more intervention on behalf of Britain, makes the United States close to Britain, but still nowhere close to actually joining World War II. That will not come until the United States is, in a way, forced into the Second World War by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Which is where we'll pick up next time. Thanks for watching.